It started with a smile, a slow, crooked smile that made my stomach flutter and my heart race. That smile belonged to Daniel, the man I thought I was falling in love with. But now, as I sit here writing this, my hand still trembling, I realize that smile was the first warning, the first red flag I chose to ignore. Because what I found in his basement wasn't just a secret. It was a nightmare, and I'm lucky to be alive to tell this story. It was December 28th, 2021, in Salem, Massachusetts. I was sitting in a cozy corner of a coffee shop on Essex Street, sipping a latte and pretending to read a book. In reality, I was people watching, something I'd done ever since moving to Salem a year earlier. The town was quiet, the kind of place where nothing ever happened until it did. That's when I saw him. He was tall, with dark hair that fell just above his piercing green eyes. He was reading a worn copy of The Shining by Stephen King, and I couldn't help but comment. "That book gave me nightmares for weeks," I said, trying to sound casual. He looked up, and that's when he smiled. That damn smile. "Sometimes," he said, his voice low and smooth, "the best stories are the ones that scare you." We talked for hours that day. His name was Daniel, and he was everything I thought I wanted. Charming, intelligent, and just mysterious enough to keep me intrigued. When he asked for my number, I didn't hesitate. Looking back, I should have run the other way. But I didn't. And that's how I ended up in his basement, staring at something I still can't fully explain. Daniel lived in an old Victorian house on the outskirts of Salem, surrounded by dense woods. The first time I visited, I remember feeling a strange unease as I stepped inside. The air was heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. But Daniel was so warm and welcoming that I brushed it off as my imagination running wild. The house was beautiful in a haunting kind of way. High ceilings, creaky wooden floors, and walls lined with old photographs and paintings. But there was something off about it, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Maybe it was the way the shadows seemed to move when I wasn't looking, or the way the air always felt a few degrees colder than it should. Things were good at first. We'd go on dates, watch horror movies, and talk for hours about everything and nothing. But there was always this distance, like there was a part of him he kept locked away. I told myself it was just his personality, that he was a private person. But then, one night, everything changed. It was January 15th, a Saturday. Daniel had gone out to run some errands, leaving me alone at his house. I was curled up on the couch with a book when I heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from somewhere below me. At first, I thought it was the pipes, but the sound was too deliberate, too human. I followed the noise to a door I'd never noticed before, tucked away in a shadowy corner of the kitchen. It was slightly ajar, and a cold draft seeped through the crack. My heart pounded as I pushed the door open, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. The tapping stopped. I called out Daniel's name, my voice trembling. No response. I hesitated, but curiosity, or maybe something darker, pulled me forward. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, illuminating the steps as I descended. The basement was unlike anything I could have imagined. The walls were lined with shelves filled with jars of things I couldn't quite identify, but that made my stomach churn. There were old photographs pinned to the walls, their edges curled and yellowed, and in the center of the room was a large rusted metal table stained with something dark. But the worst part was the sound. a low, guttural moan that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I turned my flashlight toward the source and froze. There, in the far corner of the room, was a figure. It was hunched over, its limbs twisted at unnatural angles. As I stepped closer, the figure turned to face me, and I realized with a jolt of terror that it wasn't human, not entirely. Its eyes were hollow, its skin pale and cracked like old porcelain, and it was smiling. I stumbled backward, my phone slipping from my hand and clattering to the floor. The light flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls as I scrambled up the stairs. I didn't stop running until I was outside, gasping for breath in the cold night air. Daniel found me sitting in my car, shaking and crying. He looked different. The warmth in his eyes was gone, replaced by something cold and calculating. "You weren't supposed to see that," he said, his voice eerily calm. I demanded answers, my voice breaking with fear and anger, and that's when he told me the truth. The house had been in his family for generations. His great-grandfather had been a doctor, or at least that's what people called him. In reality, he was a madman who conducted experiments on the living and the dead, trying to unlock the secrets of immortality. Daniel had inherited not only the house, but also his ancestors' work. "It's not what you think," he said, his tone almost pleading. "I'm trying to fix what he started, to undo the damage." But I didn't believe him. How could I? I'd seen the thing in the basement. I'd seen the jars, the photographs, the table, and I knew deep down that Daniel was just as twisted as his great-grandfather. I don't remember much about the drive home. My mind was a blur of fear and disbelief. I blocked Daniel's number, changed my locks, and told myself I'd never see him again. But he found me. It was a week later, on January 22nd. I was alone in my apartment, trying to convince myself I was safe, when I heard a knock at the door. My blood ran cold as I peered through the peephole and saw Daniel standing there, his expression unreadable. "Anna," he said, his voice muffled through the door. "We need to talk." I didn't answer. I couldn't. I backed away, my heart pounding, as he continued to knock, louder, more insistent. And then the knocking stopped. For a moment, there was silence, and then a single word, whispered so softly I almost didn't hear it. "Run?" I moved out of Salem the next day. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not even my closest friends. I couldn't risk Daniel finding me again. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the tapping. And I wonder if he's out there, watching, waiting. Because the truth is, you can run from a lot of things, but you can't run from the past. And Daniel's past is darker than I ever could have imagined.